Well, last time we talked about a phrase, a sentence that John writes in 1 John 5. This is in 1 John 5:3. Excuse me. And his commands are not burdensome. Well, we talked a little bit about how sometimes they feel a little burdensome, and here's the bottom line on that. They feel a little burdensome sometimes because they don't always get us what we want. Now, this is a very inadequate kind of illustration, but I'm going to use it anyway because inadequacy never stopped me. I learned the basic rules of golf from a friend of mine who was a assistant club pro. And one of the things that he made clear to me was you will always come out ahead by observing the rules than by fudging on them. And I think you come out ahead in two ways. One is you come out with your integrity. And by the way, golf is the only sport that I know of where penalties are called by the player on themselves. So there's that. I mean, one of the premises of golf is that it is a game for gentlemen. The second way that you come out ahead is you honestly, pragmatically will come out often ahead by observing the rules as opposed to fudging on them. I mean, the rules allow for taking care of issues that would cost you strokes otherwise. Now, yeah, there are, penalties for certain things and your ball going out of bounds and in an unplayable lie and things of that nature. And yet, overall, I think my friend was right. I do my best to play by the rules of golf, and over the long haul, I come out ahead. Well, it cheapens God's commands, God's rule, for me to say it's really that way with God's commands, and yet it really is. See, when we make it our priority and we partner with His grace to observe His commands, our lives will always be richer. Well, we won't always get everything we want, and yet we'll still be richer because of this one fact. God knows what is best for us, and we don't always. We know what we want, and sometimes we don't even know what we want. But we sometimes don't know what is best for us. So I just want to say, yes, sometimes God's commands seem burdensome because they're not, they don't fit with my commands. Okay. Here's the other part. John says his commands are not burdensome. And then he goes on in verse 4, for everyone born of God overcomes the world. Really? How do I overcome the world? I think in this context, John is not talking about every aspect of the world. I think he is talking about this one aspect of the world, and that is a proclivity, a tendency for us to work from a purely self-oriented, self-interested, selfish point of view in terms of what we do with our lives. I think that is the bottom line for the policies of the world. I will do what it takes to get what I want. Now, I mean, that doesn't quite explain everything, but I'm struggling to find something that the world promotes that's not at the heart of. Well, and there's this other aspect of when John talks about the world, I think he's pointing at the system that is at this point dominated by our enemy, the devil. John writes, "For everyone born of God overcomes the world." And now maybe I'm splitting hairs, but I think it's worth it. And here's the hair I'm going to split. Everyone who is born of God. That's not everyone. That is a specific group of people, men and women, boys and girls, who have said yes to Jesus on his terms. See, that's what Jesus said. He told Nicodemus, "You must be born again." That's what we're talking about, born of God. So everyone who has been born of God, who has been embraced into this new, vibrant, living, majestic, I'm running out of words, relationship with God. We're born of God. And what that means is, if you're born of someone else, you're their child. We are born of God, and in this particular, I'd even use the word peculiar way, we are his children. And these people, us, we overcome the world. Now, that phrasing, "for everyone born of God overcomes the world," he doesn't put that in the past tense. He puts that in the present tense continuing action, as though to say, because we are God's children, we are in a continuing process of overcoming the world. Do we just pull up our bootstraps and effort our way? Well, there's effort involved. None of us will overcome the world without significant effort. It just won't happen. But it isn't just our effort. Where does the power for this come from? Well, it comes from the grace of Christ, from the Spirit of God, the Spirit that God has placed in us. This is one of maybe the primary marker of the fact that we are his children. We have been born of God. And so he places his Spirit in us. And we have this source to draw from as we make effort toward overcoming the world. Now, I don't think that overcoming much of anything happens passively. Okay, think about, here's one I'm working on currently in my life, is I'm trying to overcome 10 pounds that I want, and my doctor tells me I need to lose. I will not overcome those 10 pounds accidentally or passively, unless, I get some horrible disease or condition. I'm not too interested in that. But this idea of overcoming, let's kind of look at where, when John was talking about overcoming, what's the image that the original recipients of this letter might have had in their mind. I think they would have had a military image in their mind. If not military, then at least an athletic image, where, as in wrestling, where one opponent overcomes the other. I've seen a lot of wrestling matches. I grew up in Stillwater, Oklahoma, where wrestling, when I was a boy in the 60s, wrestling was king. Oklahoma State was the national champions of the NC2A wrestling, and my gracious, man, they had teams. I have seen a lot of wrestling matches. I never saw a match where one wrestler overcame the other accidentally or without knowing it. It took strategy and effort, always. A second place, as I mentioned, would be military. One army is overcome by another. Not so much, it never happens passively. It happens, I'm going to use a pretty strong word, it happens by force. So here's where I'm going. We, because we have been born of God, we overcome the world. But this is not, okay, there are two ways it's got to be looked at. One of the ways is when Jesus uttered the words, "It is finished," the battle was over. And then that was Friday. On Sunday, when he rose from the tomb, he proved that he had won the battle. He had, in the truest, grandest sense, he had overcome the world. He had overcome our enemy, the devil. He had overcome our number one adversary, death. On another level, you and I overcome the world some days, minute by minute by minute. There is a sense in which the war has been won, and yet the battle still rages. I would love to be able to figure out a way. How do I just rest in the fact that Jesus has won, that he has fully and finally overcome the world, and I just get to rest in that? I never been able to figure that one out. And I have a sense in my heart and mind that the reason I've never been able to figure it out is because that's not how it works. It works as I partner with him and his Spirit. As in a way, I reenact his work of overcoming the world. And so I partner with him moment to moment. And boy, some days this is a more difficult and more demanding chore than on other days. But I partner with him and I make effort, calling on the power of his grace to overcome the world. And one of the big ways that I think we can't think of anybody who this would not be true of, overcome the world, is by overcoming the desires that are inconsistent with God's design. That's what John's talking about. He said his commands are not burdensome. For everyone born of God overcomes the world. Here's the thing. This is what makes his commands not burdensome. When we cooperate with God's design, his commands, and we adhere to them, and they guide our behaviors and our choices, then life, although at times it's difficult to do what God commands, but life gets better. The best life is lived when I'm doing that. And as I cooperate with God and his purposes to overcome the world, his commands become less burdensome. Now that may have, squeezed blood out of a turnip, but the truth is all of the people I know, and I'm at the head of the line, I just need to be reminded. This overcoming the world thing, it is real, but it is daily. Well, see you next time on So Care with Stevie Boy.